Do you think that earthworms ever want to see the sky? Sometimes. Sometimes they do. Sometimes they climb up on the grass. Sometimes they wiggle up to the top of a mud puddle. Do you think they want to see the sun, the moon, and the clouds as we do? I don't know. Do you think the birds, looking down, ever want to see the world underground, as earthworms do? They see the same sky every day. Perhaps, sometimes, they imagine there is another world below, where the earthworms fly, too. Sitting on the streetlights, looking down, they imagine the earthworms sitting on their own little lamp pole, looking up from a world turned upside down. When birds fly over the lake, do you think they want to see the world below the water, as fishes do? Do they imagine there's another sun and another moon down there, under the water, for all the fishes to see? In the sky, they see the sun, the moon, and the clouds, so they imagine the fish have their own world with their own sun, at the bottom of the lake, I suppose. When the fish come up to the surface, what would they expect to see? Some seaweed or an octopus floating by, another ocean, upside down, above them, in the sky. Yes, I suppose so. Earthworms want to see the sky. The birds want to see underground, and the fish want to see another ocean in the clouds. What about the pigs and the cows? What do you mean? I think cows want to see the sky, but they live their whole lives inside. Millions of cows live in factories and never see the sky. I think pigs want to see the sky, but millions of them, in the factories, live their whole lives inside, waiting to die. When they look up, they see only a metal roof, and when they look down, they see only a concrete floor. Perhaps they imagine that the world outside has only a metal sky, and the forests and fields are made of cement and steel. Even earthworms want to see the sky.
À-bas-le-ciel.
This video is going to serve two purposes. I'm going to read you out the script of the children's book that I wrote. I wrote it in Chinese, and I translated the Chinese into English. It's a book that introduces the fundamental concept of veganism to children. And because it's in both Chinese and English, in theory, it could reach a fairly large audience. In theory. And if you watch this channel, you know I've been talking to illustrators about making this a real illustrated children's book. Hopefully in the next few months that really happens, and hopefully I can do some fundraising through my Patreon channel to support it. Maybe just, selling copies of the book in advance or something when we get to that stage. I'm not sure. I'd also like to have someone come here on YouTube and read out the Chinese text in a better accent than I have in Chinese. But before I read out the script of the book, I'm just going to answer a question from a viewer. A viewer named Emmy wrote in asking, hi, I have a question. I'm an early childhood educator, so I presume she either works in a primary school or daycare center or something like that. How can you talk about veganism with young children? She asks. How would you do it? I think it would be a good video topic. I've been vegan for 10 years, but I'm still unsure about this. Much love from a French girl from Montreal, Quebec. Okay, thanks for the question, Emmy. Now, one part of the answer is already implicit in the fact that I've just written this children's book and I'm now talking to illustrators about making an illustrated children's book. I do think that the arts can bridge these issues in a very broad, fundamental, basic way. And many people have pointed out that even some Disney movies, some mainstream movies like Bambi, they do communicate the point that animals are alive and don't want to die, etc., etc. I mean, on that very simple level, some of those ideas can be communicated to children. But, there's another sense in which I think we need to recognize that veganism is not an issue for children. Whenever you're talking about a child that is too young to watch video from a slaughterhouse, which, believe me, I don't think you should be showing young children those images, then obviously there's a sense in which they can never see or deal with the reality of what the meat and dairy industry is. It's too disturbing. Now, in some ways, that's a very difficult admission for a vegan to make. But, there are some questions, whether it's about sex or violence or war or politics, where we just have to acknowledge this is an issue for grown-ups. This is something tremendously important, but this is something grown-ups talk about and grown-ups decide about and grown-ups do. I was once in an airport in Thailand, and there was a woman there, a white woman, I assume she was American, with her son. And she was so exhausted she wasn't saying anything. Her whole face, you could just see she'd had it. And her son, who was quite well rested, I assume he slept on the airplane and she did or something. Her son was very loudly lecturing everyone in the airport about how the United States should start more wars and spend more money on its military and bomb more countries. Oddly, he actually believed this for economic reasons. He wanted to massively expand the role of U.S. military. I don't know how old the kid was. He could have been 8 years old. I don't know. But he was a kid. I mean, he wasn't a teenager or something. And the mother, I remember she looked at me a couple of times to sort of check whether or not I was being so offended that she had to shut her kid up or something. Because it was offensive what the kid was saying. I was just sitting there reading the newspaper, but I was somewhat amused to hear this kid's view of American politics. I didn't say a word. I didn't say a word to the mother. I didn't say a word to the kid. Just a funny thing that happened in the airport. I mean, the truth is, ideally, what someone should have said to the kid isn't that he's wrong, isn't that he's being offensive. Really, what this kid needs to know is that he's talking about an issue that's for grown-ups, is that he's talking about something that is so serious that only adults should address it or deal with it. This is not something children should be voicing their opinions on. Doesn't mean it's something your kid should never know about. I mean, I don't think your kids should grow up ignorant about the fact that the United States is dropping bombs in other countries. I think on a broad level, they need to grow up with that political awareness. Same thing with human sexuality. Kids need to grow up with an awareness of what sexuality is and how the whole world around them is organized by it in some ways, however you want to put it. And yet, there's a sense in which it's just not something for kids to talk about, not something for them to have opinions about themselves, and where you need to be really careful and respect the fact that they are going to grow up with some level of, ignorance, of blissful ignorance in their childhood about the reality of what goes on in a slaughterhouse, about the reality of what human sexuality is and how it shapes the whole world around us, and about the reality of warfare and what warfare is. So I do think it's not too much to try to explain to a child, look, if you're talking about the deaths of millions of human beings, the violent deaths of large numbers of people, that is a topic for grown-ups. And, at your age now, you've got to leave that aside. You can't come out and say this. You can when you're older. Because for one thing, I can't show you that videotape or that photograph of showing you what battlefield carnage really looks like. I can't show you people who've been killed by predator drones, what that really is, what that really means. Whatever, go back in history. You're not going to show a child real images of what happened in World War I or in the Holocaust in World War II or of our current conflicts. I mean, today we have high-tech digital video of most of these wars and the carnage related to them and so on. And, there can be little details also that people find moving that aren't necessarily gory. Many people relate that, with the Holocaust, it's something like seeing a pile of shoes, the shoes of the people that were killed, or, children's shoes that are not, there's no blood on them or anything. It just reflects indirectly those deaths. I remember with World War I, there was an artifact in a museum, which was a really nasty dagger. And just indirectly, that dagger reflected the brutal reality of trench warfare. We may think of warfare in terms of bombs being dropped, in terms of lines on a map, in terms of strategic decision-making, in terms of the sort of high level of politics and long-term outcomes. But there's another reality. There's another reality that's harder for us to think about, that's more uncomfortable for all of us, which is the reality of people literally stabbing each other, of face-to-face struggles in the mud. To some extent, that's true of every war, but it's also different from one war to the next. And it was very true of World War I. that a lot of those, political struggles ultimately played out on that level. So no, it's not appropriate for an adult to impose on a child any of those expectations of them knowing or making decisions about matters of such violence, matters that are so disturbing, whether it's violence towards animals or violence towards people. And it does not mean that ignorance is bliss for children, but it means that we can only deal with these things in a very broad and abstract sense. And we basically have to inform children all the time, this is an issue so serious that really it's only for grown-ups. It's not an issue for you to make up your mind about. You just need to be aware that in the world of adults, this is something, in the case of warfare, this is something where large numbers of people get killed. And in the case of something like veganism, where large numbers of animals get killed. And it's something you can't really understand yet. Now, keeping it 100% real, I think there's a sense in which children also cannot understand ecology. We pretend they do because that's much less disturbing. We take children to museums and show them picture books and talk about nature and forests. And we talk about principles of recycling. I think actually adults, for the most part, we are kidding ourselves. The reality of what ecology means and what it entails, and ecology in relation to veganism. I think actually that is something that, again, you have to be an adult, or you have to be at least 11 years old to really understand what ecology means and what it entails. So we can get into similar problems there. Although it's not for the reason of it being dark and disturbing, of it involving gory images that children can't look at, can't consider, can't behold. And I'm aware there are vegans who disagree with me. There are vegans who think that children should face up to these terrible truths at an early age and know them and feel them and carry these truths with them. I don't know, if you've got your own YouTube channel and you're a vegan parent, or you're a vegan with a lot of experience with kids, it'd be interesting to hear some other perspectives on that. There's so much nonsense on vegan YouTube. Sure, it would be wonderful to hear someone speak from, someone who really disagrees about this, talk about their own experience in teaching veganism to children. Maybe there are some of you out there who really strongly believe that it is appropriate to show them images of how a slaughterhouse works or what have you. But I don't. So here is the manuscript of the book I wrote for children that definitely does not have any gory images in it. You'll see it just presents the fundamental concept. And I'd note again, this was translated from Chinese into English. So the English is maybe a little bit awkward. I might make a few changes to make the English flow, make the English sound a little bit more natural before this goes to final press. Do you think that earthworms ever want to see the sky? Sometimes. Sometimes they do. Sometimes they climb up on the grass. Sometimes they wiggle up to the top of a mud puddle. Do you think they want to see the sun, the moon, and the clouds as we do? I don't know. Do you think the birds, looking down, ever want to see the world underground, as earthworms do? They see the same sky every day. Perhaps, sometimes, they imagine there is another world below, where the earthworms fly, too. Sitting on the streetlights, looking down, they imagine the earthworms sitting on their own little lamp pole, looking up from a world turned upside down. When birds fly over the lake, do you think they want to see the world below the water, as fishes do? Do they imagine there's another sun and another moon down there, under the water, for all the fishes to see? In the sky, they see the sun, the moon, and the clouds, so they imagine the fish have their own world with their own sun, at the bottom of the lake, I suppose. When the fish come up to the surface, what would they expect to see? Some seaweed or an octopus floating by, another ocean, upside down, above them, in the sky. Yes, I suppose so. Earthworms want to see the sky. The birds want to see underground. And the fish want to see another ocean in the clouds. What about the pigs and the cows? What do you mean? I think cows want to see the sky, but they live their whole lives inside. Millions of cows live in factories and never see the sky. I think pigs want to see the sky, but millions of them, in the factories, live their whole lives inside waiting to die. When they look up, they see only a metal roof, and when they look down, they see only a concrete floor. Perhaps they imagine that the world outside has only a metal sky, and the forests and fields are made of cement and steel. Even earthworms want to see the sky. And that is the title of the book. Even earthworms want to see the sky.
À-bas-le-ciel.